It's generally easy to see how things happen, how things manifest in this world, and if you question how people make predictions about what happens, it's not necessarily reading every news article. I talked about in my previous video how all you have to do is look at the mentalities of people, not even what's happening or the subjects we're talking about. A good example is I did a video on abortions. I didn't even tackle the idea of abortions, I tackled the positions of the people who are talking about abortions, because that tells me so much about the situation. So it's generally easy to see what's coming, and this goes back to the idea of observing other people's mindsets, because again, their mindsets become their actions, and those actions become the world. So the issue with this is because people's minds are so susceptible in today's world if their knowledge is coming from the media, if it's not coming from themselves, if it's not coming from their own observations, their own research, and more than likely people are not researching for themselves. They're not thinking for themselves. If they were, then the media would not have much of an audience at all. But of course, it is their job to convince people that they need to watch them. And this is why the news is not all that necessary, all that natural. And people think it's relevant because it goes into their own life, when half the time it doesn't. It deals with external things somewhere else at some other time. I'm not saying we shouldn't feel bad or look at those scenarios. I'm saying that people's minds are going to be molded about things that they don't even know about, things that they don't even deal with in their day-to-day life, and they're stuck away from the philosophical or the rooted ideas that drive these behaviors in the first place. And that is, again, understanding people's minds, understanding psychology, how people do what they do, why they do what they do, all these things. Okay, so when you understand that fabric to society, that basic root, of course you're going to see everything that comes from that. So that's why you can look at other people's mindsets. But this is the issue, is that if it's possible for something to happen, you have to question, how possible can it happen? Is it inevitable? Is it going to happen at some point of time? So I can say a collapse is going to happen, right? Because everything looks like it's going to happen like that, and people are just going to go with it, and they have their certain money in certain places. You can see that some sort of narrative is building up, perhaps between different events, and you can start to see what's coming. You can start to have a general idea of what's coming, just generally, not even specifically, but you know exactly where it's heading. You can say it's just more control or more attention on certain figures or certain ideas, like global warming. It's a big one that constantly we are revisited with, where we think, okay, this is something that's going to affect us decades later, we need to pay attention to it now, otherwise the whole world is going to burn on fire, and humanity's going to kill itself, even though it's been through ice ages and much worse, supposedly. But again, like, I don't really know, but I'm taking that on faith by the media, by the scientists, by these religions that people follow because they follow them so extensively. Like, this is my trusted source, I get everything from this one source of information. It's like, okay, and you can see then why anything can happen. Because if people's minds are so vulnerable and they're so willing to accept certain points of view, they're so easily molded into certain ideologies, and those ideologies are all controlled by the same people or the same stations, all controlled by the same people, the same food companies, all controlled by the same people, the same marketing strategies, etc. It's really easy then to steer the direction and say, okay, well, this is where we go now with this. This is what we put in the food supply that everybody is consuming. It's easy because everybody's doing it. It's easy because everybody's following it. And so you have one public figure, somebody that everybody thinks is on their side just like them, a politician, and they're the perfect person to run for president because they fit the mentality of the current world. They fit the mentality, even if it was engineered, of the current world. And so an event can happen like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, and oh my gosh, nobody expected it, even though it was predicted in certain newspapers, etc. And Of course, there is always conspiracy theorists because people question things and they say, well, yeah, you can't, there's no such thing as having peace forever, especially under a government which gets its control through war, which gets its control through slavery. So of course there's going to be some sort of event that happens, and when that event happens, let's look around. Are people prepared? Are people looking around for events and problems that could happen? Are people getting together in crowded spaces? It's really easy to tell that a catastrophe can happen within seconds. And are people armed? Do people know what self-defense is? Do people know what martial arts are? Do people know how to survive in nature? Do people are economically free? And being that the answers to all these deal with some level of dependence, and I'm just going to order follow and just go with the flow, literally anything can happen, and it can happen successfully, and people are going to be like, oh my gosh, what happened? And the media is going to give them their, oh my gosh, what happened? Similar response, so it feeds their validation of what happened. And if you know the deep psychology of this, you might want to explain more in detail what I'm trying to say, basically, or maybe you understand more as to what I'm trying to say. But like I said, people are vulnerable. Should they be vulnerable? No. Their will should be strengthened. Their mind should be strengthened. How? By thinking for themselves. If they were introduced new knowledge, they should come up with at least like 10, 15, 20 questions based on that knowledge, if they have a mind of their own. And if they're not stuck in a religion which says, oh, I'm just not gonna, that's not true, hear my point of view before hearing out that point of view. So religion told us back of all kinds, money, politics, what have you, and that can bring us toward different ways of directions, the same way as being too open-minded and just going with the flow. So it's just as bad as one another. You know, somebody might say this is left brain versus right brain, but it doesn't matter. This is just the nature of these mentalities, being too close-minded and being too open-minded, being too naive and being too analytical. These are extremes that have to be understood, so you can strike a balance and say, well, what if we can critically think, but also not too critically think, not be too stuck into semantics, expect certain words of people and everything, even though, you know, because you think it provides more perspective. Well, if you think somebody's doing something wrong, you think I'm speaking wrong about something, Mark Passio, perhaps, you know, just start speaking, start doing work. I mean, what better is that? And talk about the exact opposite of order following. You're literally producing content. You're literally helping free minds. You're expressing your own mind, which is what they don't want. And if you're just doing it in day-to-day conversations with people, sure, great, but what about the internet? Out there forever, eternal. And again, this goes alongside the evolution of humanity. We have technology all at our disposal. We have information all at our disposal. And again, if people are not using that, well, do you think anything can happen and people are just going to have this problem react solution, like, oh, let's put this prop here and everybody's going to fear, and then we can introduce this bill, introduce this law, this act, and everybody's going to go along with it? This is the problem, and this is why it's so easy to see what's coming. Because of these dichotomies, these extremes that people are constantly on all the time, you know. When they're at a very young age, they're exposed to Disney, they're exposed to media, exposes them to all this like hypersensitive ideas of good ideas, but over to the extreme, and then fantasizing it and mixing it with all sorts of weird messages and symbolisms. And then as you get older, you have this weird, perverted or fantasized version of reality, and then reality hits you in the butt and you're like, wait, that's all wrong, I'm going to become an atheist. Do you see how this world is putting you in the scenario where you are basically trapped? Because if you don't have a mind of your own or can't find that in some place in time, you're always going to be following somebody else's mind, because we live in a world of consumerism. So there's billions of opinions, everybody's got their own podcast now, everybody and their mom, everybody's got their own TV show, their own, channel. But the question is, again, are you doing it? And you say, well, why do I want to be like one of them? Well, you're not being like one of them, you're creating your own. You understand? You're not being like one of them. You don't have to be like one of them. Who said you had to be like one of them? Who said you had to do things exactly the way they did? Why is it that so many people do make it pretty big online? Because they come up with some pretty good ideas, right? Some of them are part of the club, right? But generally, if you have somewhat of a community, it's because you're introducing something that is special, something that is unique, that isn't usually seen somewhere else, or just generally you as a human being. You're just sharing you, because by your nature, you're unique. You're yourself. So again, if you are not, well, then you are susceptible. You're a slave. It's easy to steer you with the rest of the cattle and the sheep into the slaughterhouse, because, well, you're following what's happening. And so many times, I was younger and I was trapped in this whole moral thing, which helped in the sense of understanding morality, being that, I come from a good family background and such, but seeing that I gave them the benefit of the doubt, right? People are open-minded. People can be introduced to this knowledge. People can learn, but what I see to find out is that I introduce a lot of knowledge to them about statism, about government, about their own realities that they themselves are enforcing, saying that slavery still exists, as my book says in the back, and all of a sudden, nope, don't want to listen to it. It's out of my critique. If it's not about the day-to-day entertainment, not about what I want to hear, I don't want to hear it. And so it's easy for them to be steered in different directions. It's easy for them not to create for themselves and thus not create for the world and help other people get out of their own direction. This is an effort that we need to take together in helping free minds. This is not something one person can do or several people can do. It needs a lot of people, because if the very problem with the world is a lot of people following orders, then the very solution to the world is a lot of people not following orders. This is the only time where the majority matters, and it matters the most. If you want to prevent death, if you want to get rid of slavery in its totality, if you want anything good, inventions, freedom, it all is hand in hand. Thank you very much for watching. And so if you see minds that are susceptible or pulled toward different religions of different kinds, you see it everywhere in today's world, even if it's just advertising, using certain shirts, using certain products, right? You have to question, well, why are they using that thing? Do they know why they're doing it? Do they know why they're doing what they're doing? Or are they doing it because of what they've been programmed to think? That really questions everything about people's lives and tells you how free they actually are.